This video is going to demonstrate the different workspaces that we have here. To remind you, those are the edit widgets, the edit signals and slots, the edit buddies, and the edit tab order workspaces. Let's start off with the one we are currently in, the edit widgets one. This workspace or view, whatever you prefer calling it, is the one that allows us to add, remove, or otherwise manipulate with the widgets on the screen. I'm actually going to add two widgets, a Q slider, and we're going to use the horizontal slider, and also a Q progress bar. Let's add it somewhere below. So going to reset this silly 24% back to 0. So the next thing we're going to do is switch to the signal and slot workspace. As you can see, this widget box is grayed out so that we can't really do anything with it. But what we can do is I'm going to click this slider here, which as you see shows up as red, and I'm going to drag my mouse down below to the progress bar. Watch this connection that appears on the screen. Once I release my mouse button, I get this dialog. In it, I can select any signal that QSlider comes with. The one that I'm interested in right now is the slider moved signal, which is fired every time when you move the slider, be it to the left or to the right. In the parentheses here, we're told what type of parameter this signal passes to its slot or handler. And in this case, it's the int or integer, and that parameter contains the current value of the slider. So if we move the slider all the way to the right with our horizontal slider, it's going to be 100. If we move it all the way to the left, it's going to be either 1 or 0. That kind of also depends on how we configure the slider in the property editor. If I click the slider moved signal, I'm offered a list of compatible slots for our Q progress bar on the right side here. The one that I want to connect our signal to is the set value, which also takes int as a parameter, and which, as its name says, sets the value of the progress bar. Let's click that, hit OK. And not only do we have these silly labels here, but we also have the new entry in our signal and slot editor below. We have our sender, which in our case is a horizontal slider, and the horizontal slider is the object name of our Q slider. We have the signal that's being fired, which is slider moved, the receiver object, which is also an object name, and in this case it's progress bar, and finally the slot or the handler, which is set value. Let's preview the application and see what happens when I move the slider. As I move the slider, you can see that the progress bar gets updated automatically. If I move it all the way to the right, you can see that it's actually configured to 99%. These two values are always the same, since that integer contains the value of the slider, the integer that is in the signal. These two values are always going to be the same. It's worth noting that you probably won't be using this feature a whole lot. Usually you'll want to connect the signal to your own handler, something that will actually do an action that you wrote yourself. But still, it's nice to know that this feature exists, and if you ever need it, it's there for you to use. Let's go back to our Edit Widgets workspace. I'm actually going to remove these two widgets, and I'm going to add 3 Q-line edits. Let's just put them in some random order. And I'm also going to add 3 Q labels as well. Change its text from text label to, let's say, I don't know, name. And another thing you can do is just copy paste these widgets. I'm going to use Control-C and Control-V on my keyboard. Change this one from name to, let's say, age. And finally, the third one should be, for example, city. Okay, on to our next workspace, the Edit Buddies workspace. Yes, it's actually called a buddy, but what would you honestly expect from the framework that itself is called Qt? So let me click that. And the buddies are kind of a connection that doesn't really have a huge meaning, and it's there when it comes to labels and their respective Q-line edits. So here we can connect these 3 labels to There are queueline edits as in those queueline edits where we want the values or answers to the questions those labels pose. For example, we want the user to input their name here, so we'll connect this label to our queueline edit here. We'll connect this one to one there, and finally the city to this final one here. If you're an HTML developer, think of this as a label for and then specifying the ID of the text input. Honestly, that's about it when it comes to buddies, really. So we have one more workspace left, and that's tab order workspace. Before I show you what it does, let's preview our application first. Everything looks fine, and as I type, let's say Bo, if I want to navigate to the next queueline edit without having to use my mouse, I'd normally use the tab key on my keyboard. If I press tab, I get the queueline edit that's right below it, and hit tab again, and I get to the last one. But what happens if I first close this and I rearrange these queueline edits and their respective buddy labels? Go back to edit widgets. I'm just going to put this age one that was in the middle on the last position here. Let's preview the application again. And let me type my name, and if I hit tab, I'm actually down here at the age, which is the last one. If I hit tab again, I'm back up, which is not really something you want your user to experience. So how do we fix this? Why does this happen? This happens because the tab order is out of order. To restore it back to kind of normal order, all we need to do is hit the edit tab order workspace, and then we can simply click in the order that we want the tabs to appear in. So if I click this one as number 1, then click the city as number 2, this age shows up at number 3 again, so I can just click it to confirm it, and it's all fine and great. Go back to edit widgets one. Let's preview the form. Now if I type Bo here, I say tab, or I hit tab on my keyboard, I'm back to the city, which is the middle one, and finally age is the last one. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm sure that you're more than eager to find out how it is exactly that we implement these designs in our application and in our code. And this is actually the topic that we have for our next video.